And we are live. Cribble TV. We are here today. This is Ed Bailey, technical evangelist with Cribble. This is Sid Shah, one of our very excellent solution engineers. We're here today to talk about how Cribble helps security operations engineers get full value from CrowdStrike data. Sid, thanks for being on the show. Tell me a little bit about yourself. What do you do for Cribble?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm one of the solutions engineers, and my role consists of working with our customers out in the field to help them solve their challenges, right? And in this case, specifically CrowdStrike, with data volume, getting data into their SIEMs, ensuring that they have what they need for their security analysis, detection, and response.
Sounds awesome. So where are you based out of?
I'm based out here in Orlando, Florida, so it's bright and sunny outside, so I can't complain about that. I actually landed here. Previously, I came from a customer, so being a remote first company, I decided that I was going to stick it out in the sun.
There you go. It's up to the summertime, and it's a little bit too sunny.
Yeah, then we hide indoors.
There you go. All right, so let's get into the deck. There we go. So Cribble and CrowdStrike. Let's talk about what is CrowdStrike FDR data. CrowdStrike FDR data is the data you get. So you go out, get a contract with CrowdStrike, you put their wonderful agents on all of your servers, laptops, endpoints, and generate an enormous amount of high quality data that includes asset and identity detections, just all sorts of great data about your environment. The problem is it's a lot of data. It is a non-trivial amount of data. Customers typically are not prepared to get value from this data. You typically can't, so much data, they can't put it in their SIEM. We've had customers who have gotten this amount of data that's would have doubled their SIEM license, and they simply couldn't afford it. And it's tough to get full value if you can't utilize the data that the tool generates. And so we see this very constantly. See all this with different EDRM products. And this is something I think is really important about Cribble Stream especially, is not only is a great tool to help you get value, but help you make all your other tools better. And so we're going to go into, why does this matter? How does this matter? Why it matters? How to do it? And then Sid's going to have a really great demo and go through our customer experience. A little bit of education about Cribble. Cool. We offer something, an observability pipeline called Cribble Stream. It sits in between your sources and destinations using your existing agents as a way to control your data. It gives you full control of the data plane to do what you need to do with your data. So if you want to be able to use Splunk and Exabeam, not a problem. If you want to use Splunk Chronicle, even better. If you want to use Splunk Chronicle and Elastic, go for it. Give you that kind of choice and control. One of the, especially in the security community, one of the real trends we're starting to see in the environment is the idea that we're only going to put what's necessary for detection and response in the SIEM, and we're going to put everything else in your security data lake in order to get better analytics options in your data lake and also cheaper options in your data lake, and still keep your SIEM in its best use cases and also to help manage your costs. Sid, is this something that you're seeing? How are you seeing your customers starting to get more value from their SIEM and separate their analytics and detection capabilities?
Yeah, so I'm seeing this quite a bit. A lot of our customers, what they find is with such a large volume of data, a lot of it needs to be retained for things like compliance and regulatory requirements out in the field. So what they'll do is they'll take all their data, they'll put it in a more cost-efficient data lake, somewhere like S3 or another platform. And what they do is they'll send the important bits over to their SIEM. That gives them the flexibility of choosing how long they retain the data in the SIEM, giving them that choice and control. And if they ever have to go bring back data in, they can use Cribble Stream to go out to that data lake, bring it back in if it's in somewhere like S3, or if it's already searchable, they have the flexibility of searching it ad hoc as they need.
That's a great point about being able to use an object store to manage your retention. Managing your retention inside your SIEM is possibly the most expensive way to do it. It's not something you want to do. So what that part of that choice of control with Cribble Stream is I can send my one copy of my data to my object store, manage your retention, and decouple your retention requirements from your SIEM. It's a great story you have. And also, let's talk a little bit more the business value, why it matters. Everyone, especially right now in the current macroeconomic period, is very concerned about increasing OpEx costs. See it very commonly in the observability and security space where the amount of data you have to control, track, and get value from is growing dramatically. 25 to 45% is very typical. And of course, your budget is not tracking at that same range. So how do you handle 5% increases in your or flat in terms of spend and still keep control of this data without blinding yourself, without passing up on quality data sources, without throwing data away? And that's that's a big advantage of an observability pipeline, because it gives you the ability to control. We're only going to put we're only going to put this much data in our SIEM, so we're going to flatten our spend. We're not going to spend any new money because we're not growing anymore. We're going to be able to handle our server costs are not going to have to change. We're not going to have to buy a lot of new servers because we're not adding 35, 45% more data over time. And also we can take advantage of more cost-effective storage options such as object storage for retention and modern cloud data lakes. And not only am I going to get more capabilities, but I'm also going to manage my cost. I mean, one thing I see over and over again, something I saw back when I was a customer, that you had this that the whole concept was we want to use our SIEM for everything. And it just wasn't sustainable because our threat hunters, IR teams would be running big queries because they needed to understand data and understand how they can improve detections. Those same big queries were then conflicting with resources for detection. And so giving the analytics needs that everyone needed and the reserving resources for detections became very difficult. And if by decoupling those dependencies, you tell your threat hunters, go crazy, query that data. You don't have to worry about, any conflicts with your detection pipeline. Sid, what do you think? What are you seeing? Is that something that you saw when you were a customer?
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing I keep saying is customers who say, well, we have license for this data. But every customer ends up having this backlog of data that is deemed, I'm going to call it a second priority. But it still has valuable insights in it. And being able to optimize your data going into your SIEM, right? Picking the bits and pieces that are relevant and that are going to help you with your detection and not create noise gives you better performance. And it also gives you that bandwidth to put in the other data sources that are sitting on the shelf so you get better insights or better data into your analytics tool. Excuse me.
Exactly. And I think that cannot be underestimated. Your 10 terabyte a day license, you can then, with Cribble, you can then get rid of the noise, get rid of the junk, and keep bringing in those secondary data sources that have value without having to buy more license. And so that's why that license, that resource optimization use case, I think is so important. You'll rarely drop your utilization, because what you'll do is you'll clean up 25, 35% of your data, and you'll find better data sources to take its place. But I think the thing to focus on from a business perspective is you stop your growth. And then let's go into the observability pipeline. That's why I mentioned the data lake. I think it's such an important concept. If you're a Snowflake user and you want your security teams to get really advanced analytics, with Cribble, you can clone your data, have a filter that this is what we want going to the security data lake. We want this going to our SIEM, and Snowflake, Databricks, take your pick. If you want to put the data into a S3 bucket and use Humio, that's great too. Also, don't ever forget about Cribble Search. The Cribble Search is a great option as well. You can put the data into a raw S3 bucket, and you can search it at will. And so this is a great way to maintain your own data lake, even if you're using a cloud SIEM product. Maintain your retention in your storage, drop your cost, and use something like a Humio or a Cribble Search to get value from that data. So much more flexibility and cost management.
And Ed, one thing that I think sometimes gets overlooked, especially when you're using something like S3 or an object store for your data lake, is you're no longer tied to a vendor. If you decide to completely switch platforms, you still have the ability to go back and pull data out and maybe backfill a new tool, or at least take the data with you when you migrate somewhere else.
And that's a key, especially if you're using a cloud logging or SIEM platform. Once you put that data into someone else's cloud, it's not your data anymore. Getting that data out of their cloud, if you want to use it for something else, is very, very difficult. And so if you put it on your own storage, you can do what you want with it. Over and over again, I've seen customers that use the replay features in Cribble Stream to pick out the data that they're concerned about from, say, I want the month of October. I can put that over into an analytics tool like a Snowflake. I can put that into another S3 bucket where I can search it. I have control over it. I can do what I want to do with my data. And I think that's a critical issue these days, especially if you're concerned about lock-in. All right. So Sid, why don't you go ahead, share your desktop, and let's show the users the CrowdStrike. Show the users CrowdStrike. Tell us about a customer that you have, and let's hear what you have to say.
Sure. So just a couple things, right? So just kind of diving into what's on my screen. For those who may not be familiar with Cribble Stream, we offer what we can call Cribble packs. And packs are a great starting point for common data sources, right? So we're talking about CrowdStrike here. And it's a great place to get started, kind of take the brain trust of other customers, the other experts at Cribble and elsewhere that have contributed to this pack, and kind of get the best nuggets out of all that knowledge, right? Take the tribal knowledge and kind of make it public. So what I have on my screen is, yeah, sure.
You can ask a question. So what exactly is a pack? Is it like a grouping of stuff? I mean, is it a grouping of technology? Is it a grouping of instructions? I mean, what is it? Can you give me an analogy?
Yeah, so a pack is a good way of just saying it's a set of configurations that match a use case typically. So in the case of CrowdStrike, right, we're going to look at common data sources or data types that come into CrowdStrike FDR data. What are best practices around maybe parsing that, ideas for filtering it or reducing it, or maybe aggregating some of this data? What have other customers found that might not be relevant? And we include all sorts of lookup tables and other methodologies with instructions along the way on how you do that. I have up the README here. It also gives great documentation on how kind of the data comes in from CrowdStrike in this case, right? We have inventory events and other streaming events coming from CrowdStrike, and what options you have available to you. It's a great way to get kind of the wheels turning on some of the ways you can manage this data.
Ask another question. So where are these? So is Cribble host these packs? Who's hosting the packs?
Yeah, so these packs are hosted in what we call the Cribble Pack Dispensary. It's available at packs.cribble.io. It's also available directly in the product. You can install these with just one click, and I'll actually show you exactly where that is.
There you go.
Packs, new pack, click Add from Dispensary. Now you'll see the CrowdStrike FDR one here is already installed.
Wow, that's really cool. It makes it easy.
Yeah, so you come in here, and if it was not installed, this button would be blue. Just click Install. In a matter of seconds, you have these configurations available to you.
That's really cool. So show us what's in the pack.
Sure. So those who are familiar with Cribble may know the concept of our routes and pipelines, and you're going to see exactly that same translation come over to the pack. For those who aren't familiar with Cribble Stream, a route is just a set of, or is a rule that helps you determine a set of data you're going to do, quote unquote, something to. And that something is going to be the pipeline I mentioned earlier. So you'll see that in this case, we have a couple routes. I'm going to maximize this or minimize the right side there to show streaming events and inventory events. And I think for this, the most relevant parts can be those streaming events. So we can start diving into what that looks like and see some of the functions and flexibility that we have as we go through maybe handling this data.
Where does this data come from? So does CrowdStrike send it to you? Do you pull it from them? Does Cribble support that too?
Yeah, so CrowdStrike provides an S3 bucket and a queue typically for this data. So a little story, I was working with a customer. We were getting ready to start onboarding this data. And what they asked for was a call prior to our first meeting to help set up this data source. And they scheduled about an hour. And they were like, I think it's going to take about an hour. We actually hopped on, chatted a little bit, got everything stood up, and we were off the call in 15 minutes. So all you really need is the credentials that are provided to you in your CrowdStrike portal for that simple queue, an S3 bucket, plug them into Cribble Stream, and you're really off to the races that quickly.
Oh, okay. So you just set up that as a source in Cribble Stream, right?
Exactly. We have a native tile for it. Actually, I'll show you where the tile is. Down here under Pool Data Sources, you'll notice a CrowdStrike FDR tile, and the setup is really just a queue and some credentials.
You can't beat that. Wow, that makes and I think that's important and not to be underestimated. Is all this work is designed to just take a lot of the toil, a lot of the pain out of being a network security data admin.
And I'd be remiss to say that even when learning about Cribble, right, one of our company philosophies is all our training should be free, right? If someone is taking the time out of their day to learn our product, we shouldn't be charging them for that. So all of this is documented openly on our website at docs.cribble.io, and we also offer training on this for free as well.
Very cool. And also just take at the bottom of the screen, we have a link to Cribble sandboxes. This is a great way to get your hands on the product without having to install anything. And you'll have a guided walkthrough of all the various functionality of Cribble Stream and Cribble Edge. So go ahead, Sid. Just tell me about. I wasn't sure about how data got into Stream in order to handle it. So this makes it so much easier.
Absolutely. So I'm going to dive back into the pack. Looking open the CrowdStrike pack here, and I'm going to kind of relate this to how I work with my customer on this. So one of their first ask was, do you have pre-built configurations? And our answer was yes. But what we wanted to be very transparent with them is these are great best practices, but we want you to review, and we will work with you in reviewing these configurations, right? Because every business has their own requirements for what data they'd like going to their SIEM, what data they don't like going to their SIEM, and how they want to tune those knobs. So everything in this pack is 100% customizable. There's nothing hidden. It's all out there for you to see. So you can truly audit what's happening to your data before it reaches your SIEM, and all those changes are tracked as well.
Do you think it's fair to say this gets a customer about 85% of the way, then they can make the choices about exactly how they want to manage the data?
I think 85% is a really good number. I say that because this removes a lot of the guesswork around what types of data, what are you parsing? The example I'll give is when I was working with this customer, they expected about 60 gigs a day of CrowdStrike FDR data. When they turned this on, they got about a terabyte, and they had absolutely zero idea where to start, minus turning the data off because it was absolutely destroying their SIEM license. So the first thing was, how do we handle this data, right? Where should we start to get I'm going to call it the best bang for their buck? So the pack was a fantastic place to start. We started reviewing it very quickly, got a great ROI on that. And that kind of led to our next question, right? Is, all right, now that we're 85% of the way there, what about the remaining 15%, right? We're getting millions and millions of events. We have no idea where to start. So one of the really cool things we can do with Cribble Stream is we can send data to multiple locations. So the way we went about this was we actually took all their CrowdStrike data, figured out what event types were in there, and turned those into metrics and sent it to their metric store. This was really cool because as we worked through this, every day they could go back to that metric store and go, these are the data sources that are the largest, the most voluminous. Let's go tackle those to get to where we need to be as quickly as possible. Because they had turned off CrowdStrike FDR data going to their SIEM, they didn't have the visibility that they truly needed. So it was a battle against time.
Yeah, and that just goes back to also using your security data lake as a way you can park your entire data set in the security data lake and only put what you need in your SIEM.
Yeah, so looking at this pack, right, we kind of go through the different data types here, just starting from the top to bottom, right? Everything's commented, really easy to understand, right? We're parsing some data. We're fixing timestamps, which are always a challenge because when you go back and search data, you want to make sure that you're searching the right time periods. And then from there, kind of going along
the
with
blue button on the left-hand side. Is that like an on-off button?
Sorry.
What are the blue buttons on the left-hand side?
Yeah, that's part of the customization that you're afforded in Cribble Stream, right? So if you say, hey, I don't want to drop some of these common simple names, you're easily able to turn that off, save it. And what's really cool is on the right side, while I haven't opened it yet, you can get a preview of exactly what you're changing in real time without deploying configs and without affecting the data stream going to your destination, whether that be the security data lake or your SIEM or another platform altogether. So as you make these changes, you'll see how that data is being transformed on the right side. You can also pull up very high-level metrics for your sample here and see that, hey, I tweaked a couple things, and I'm already able to reduce both bandwidth, the number of events, and the raw length or the length of the event going to your SIEM.
Nice. One thing I wanted to ask, so I see here in the middle it says in and out, so you can see the before and the after as you make changes?
Correct. So I can toggle back and forth and say, hey, event number 1 looked like this. And while it is a string, you also get the ability to kind of pretty print it. So it's much easier to read as opposed to a block of text. And then I can flip back to the outside and say, okay, well, message 1 in this case was removed from the stream going to my destination based off some of these rules. And if you actually do look very closely, you can see CrowdStrike General there, which tells me that this CrowdStrike General pipeline was the one that affected this event and removed it from the stream.
This is pretty amazing because I've had to do this where you're doing development from the command line, and so it makes it much more difficult and time consuming to understand the impact of every change, or this is just right in front of you.
Absolutely. I think this is a more modern approach. As someone who formerly administered a SIEM and worked with many customers on their SIEM installations, when you're working in config files, a lot of times it's trial and error, rinse and repeat, kind of deploying, what I say, cross your fingers and hope for the best, and kind of just iterate through it. This removes a lot of the guesswork out of that, and it's a lot more immediate. You're not restarting infrastructure over and over and impacting your end users.
You're awesome. Hey, I just want to say, got some good talk, especially in the LinkedIn channel from Maria, Bradley, and Chris. So it's always great to have some listeners. If anyone has questions, please let us know, and Sid and I will do our best to answer. That's really cool. So tell me what's next. So this is a great example. And so is there something in the pack for all types of CrowdStrike data? And also,
Yeah.
at the bottom, it looks like something's turned off. So can you share what's turned off and why?
Yeah, so if we expand this, we'll see that this is a function for enrichment with Redis. So one of the things about CrowdStrike data is included in every event or most events is this AID field. And what that really is a unique identifier for where this data originated from. Well, looking at it, it's a bunch of numbers and letters, to be quite frank. That's not a lot of value. So you're able to integrate something like Redis and take one stream of CrowdStrike data that has the mapping to say, hey, this AID value matches the source of the data. Load that into Redis while simultaneously enriching this data. So now you have that flexibility of saying, hey, I want to add contextual information to the data as it reaches the SIEM. So that way, when your analysts or when yourself or you're looking at the data, you have the contextual information. You're not trying to cross-correlate across multiple data sets or even worse, multiple tools.
Yeah, that's a big deal. I mean, asset and identity is everything in security. I mean, that's where everything starts. And so being able to have good enrichment is very, very powerful.
So, so that's one way we do enrichment, right? The other way is I'll use the DNS.
Question. So
Oh,
Sean
sure.
Cannon's asking, does the pack make the data SIEM compliant with Splunk?
We do have some SIEM fields, but the flexibility you have with Cribble Stream is you can rename any field at any point in the pipeline. So in this case, this is a Splunk example. We do add some of the required fields, but it doesn't automatically make it SIEM compliant. Now, if you're running a Splunk app in Splunk already that expects the fields as they were originally in the data, it may become Splunk SIEM compliant as it reaches the destination. But you also have the flexibility of doing that in stream if you choose to.
Right. I mean, I think the one thing you can't do is add tags, but you can do is, especially in terms of field renaming, I find Stream invaluable about maintaining some compliance or at least being able to fix problems.
And one of the benefits of doing that at the stream level is you're able to use multiple, I'm going to call them schemas. So if you're sending data, in this case, we were using Splunk as an example, you're able to make it Splunk SIEM compliant. But if you're also sending it to Elastic, you have the flexibility of using the Elastic's common schema format or
Yes, baby.
Amazon's open source data lake. You have the flexibility of choosing one of the standards, or maybe you have a company internal standard that you like to abide by. You have the flexibility of doing that.
In a fairly release that's going to come fairly soon, there's going to be even better support from different types of schemas. I think that's critically important because each one of the SIEM vendors has some sort of schema you need to support. Sean, does that answer your question? Please let us know if you needed something else. Go ahead, Sid.
So yeah, in terms of enrichment, right, we were kind of talking about that a little earlier and how important that is. I think it's really good to get enrichment, but I think it's also really important to be able to bring in other data to help you figure out what's important, right? Using DNS as an example, I'm going to open this pipeline for a DNS set of data from CrowdStrike. One of those things is being able to say, hey, this is a common domain, right? The example I'll give is when I was working with this customer, every morning at 8:30 in the morning when they open their offices, everyone logs onto their laptops or their desktops. They open up Microsoft Teams and Google Chrome. Maybe they go to Outlook to check their email. Those are all things that are probably known good quantities, right? And this gives you the flexibility of filtering it. So we can bring in something like a list of DNS hosts that are common, something like the Majestic Million, and filter those out because we know that those are probably okay. Removing the noise to be able to find maybe that malicious domain or the unexpected domain.
Yeah, the morning storm I'm well familiar with.
So it's a fantastic enrichment use case. And that applies to other stuff as well, right? When it comes to time stamping, we give you the flexibility of bringing in information about time zones for different devices. I've worked with a customer who used their primary office as time zone 0, which kind of defeats every standard. But we were able still to work with that data set in Cribble Stream because we were able to use a mapping to go back and say, hey, anything in this quote unquote time zone that was time zone 0 is actually the East Coast, and kind of shift that data to match a more standard, I guess is a good way to put it, that a SIEM would be able to read.
And that's critically important. I was just working with a customer, and they had a really great idea where what they started doing was putting a UTC compliant timestamp for every syslog event. So the idea was at ingest, we're going to add a high precision timestamp for UTC, and so it made a big difference in their ability to manage syslog. And I think that goes back to that choice and control, because timestamps and time zones are the problem no one ever talks about in logging, and so you get a lot more flexibility with Cribble.
Absolutely. And speaking of flexibility, right, we talked about maybe filtering out DNS queries, but that same logic applies to pretty much any data stream, right? Do I need to know that everybody in the company opened Microsoft Teams when their laptop booted up, especially if it's maybe something that's set by default? Maybe not, right? And those examples go on, right? We find that not just in CrowdStrike, but when you're correlating CrowdStrike data to other data sources, there's a lot of redundancy. And the example I like to give is CrowdStrike logs data about CrowdStrike sending data to CrowdStrike, which, it's redundant maybe compared to DNS logs or your other endpoint protection programs or software. It removes the noise and kind of clears up the field so you can find what you're looking for.
Critically important, because that's an example of, all right, we don't care about CrowdStrike logging about itself. So if it's an info, we're just going to throw it away. But we're going to put the asset and identity in the SIEM and put everything else over here. It's just even better options. So Sean has another question. So he's saying that his struggle is with the Splunk add-on for CrowdStrike, as it has a ton of fields, evals, source type detections. And Sean, this is something that I know we've been working on, and this is something that's going to get better over time. But I totally get it. And you do have to put a little bit of time into managing the data coming into Splunk in order so that it matches with that add-on correctly. Sid, do you have any wisdom to share?
Yeah, so I've actually noticed a lot of our customers will take away the add-ons and just use the apps. And the reason I say that is a lot of this data is searched for directly in enterprise security data models, or even just ad hoc. We're able to even move some of that data out to metadata, so we can standardize those field names to what the evals and the other statements are doing in the Splunk add-on, but kind of remove the obscurity of a config file for something that's a little more intuitive. You can easily comment, search, and find in a UI. The way I like to put it is you can build it in Splunk, but if you build it in Cribble, the person who comes in after you, whether it be your counterpart, maybe move on to another role in the company and someone else is backfilling you, it's a lot more intuitive to read, a lot more intuitive to pick up, and it kind of removes that barrier to entry when managing a lot of these systems.
And I really appreciate Sean's feedback. So I think what I'll do is I'll invite you back so we can talk a little bit more about SIEM compliance, because I think that that's an underrated issue with any of your SIEMs that I think that needs more attention. So we can definitely talk about that. So tell me about your customer. So the customer you're helping with this, so they had a lot more data than they expected, and it was blowing up their SIEM license. So how much were you able to reduce it so they still got value, but they were able to manage the costs?
So when they came to us, like I mentioned earlier, they had a terabyte of data of CrowdStrike that they had to do something with. They were expecting 60 gigs, but what they actually had was about 250 to 300 gigs of bandwidth in their SIEM license. So we actually got it down to about 250 gigs a day, which was well within their SIEM license, which really helped them out. So they were actually able to take in all that data. And then now they're looking at options of maybe archiving some of the stuff that they're not sending to their SIEM in another tool, right? That they haven't quite picked what they're going to use, but whether it be a cloud data lake or something like an S3 bucket, just so they have it for audit and compliance, and they still have the flexibility of bringing that back in. So the short answer would be just about 75% was what they were able to turn the knobs to. I wouldn't be doing my due diligence if I didn't put the disclosure that we like to give you the knobs to turn. It really is up to the customer on how far they want to turn those knobs. We're happy to work with you, but we want to make sure that you get the value of the data as well, not just filter everything out.
And that's a great point. I think it's very important to give customers that starting point, because you have a starting point toward a recommended config, but you have to make your own decisions. Putting a vendor in control of reducing this data can be really dangerous if you don't understand exactly what's happening. Everyone has slightly different requirements, and I think that's like when I was a customer, I would have hated if someone said, "Okay, we're going to take your data set and we're going to do this," and not give you any control. And so I just want to that's a great point. Thanks. So
Yeah, and then the worst time to find out that you don't have the data you need is in the middle of an investigation, right? And then it's a lot of scrambling to figure out what happened to the data, where does it live, or do I even have it, right? Maybe you lost that insight completely.
And that's why, just going back to our original conversation of decouple your retention from your analysis from your SIM, and then you can give yourself a lot more flexibility.
I think one thing we really haven't touched about that flexibility is just having the right tool for the job. So not the same customer, but I'll give another example. Having a customer who sends the data that's relevant to their SIM, and their SIM works great. But when they have things like a threat hunt scenario, what they do is they actually go out to their data lake, which is in an S3 bucket. They pull that out and send it to another tool more suited for that. Very quick searches, very easy indexing, but it doesn't have a security layer on it. But it's great to be able to dive into the data very, very quickly with very little effort. And they're able to choose the time ranges and the endpoints and the networks that they need. So they have a very specialized set of data.
I mean, CrowdStrike actually has a tool called LogScale. I think many people may know as Humio. That's a great choice for exactly what you're talking about. And of course, Cribble search is also an option as well.
Absolutely.
Yep. So tell me, what's the next step? So once you split up this data, you put the right data in your SIM, you put your other data in your data lake. What's the next step? Do you see customers optimizing? They're doing more enrichment. What do they do once they onboard this data the first time?
So once they onboard the data the first time, and they're at a steady state where they're like, okay, we're happy with the volume, we're happy with the data, then it's about exactly what you said, enrichment and kind of improving the data stream. Now that they have data going in, it's about bringing contextual information. Maybe it's CMDB information, excuse me, where now when their analysts look at the data, they can easily figure out who owns the endpoint or the server, what's running on it. And more importantly, now that you have that contextual information, you're able to figure out what shouldn't be running on that box and get information on that as well. I've also seen customers not put data in right away. So, kind of coming back to the example we were talking about earlier, they'll go through all this and they'll let it run. They'll let the data come into Cribble stream, and they won't send it anywhere right away. And the reason they do that is they're able to go to our monitoring console and see exactly what's flowing through. I don't have a ton of data flowing through my instance here, so you're going to see basically zero volume. We're able to dive in and see how much data is coming in, how many events are going out, what the volume of that data is, where is it going. And it's a great sanity check before throwing it all in their SIM and maybe polluting a very clean data set.
And that's something I always recommend when you're onboarding data, have a clear process. And I think the first thing is pull that data in, route it to dev null, route it to route it to an S3 bucket, route it to your secondary logging, and don't put it into your primary logging platform. So that way you can take a look at it, examine it as is, and that way you can make changes. You don't want to do that blindly without understanding exactly how the data is coming in.
Exactly. It's all about mitigating risk, right? You don't want to end up in a situation where you've introduced more problems, especially in something that's so critical to business operations.
One thing, and since you bring that up, so can you give everyone an example of a live capture about how you would capture that data so that then you could apply it to the pack?
Sure. So full disclosure, I don't have CrowdStrike data flowing through my environment, but I'll kind of show what that flow looks like.
It's just still yeah. Can you go to the sources and do it from there?
Sure. So if I go to sources, and if I have CrowdStrike data flowing through, I'm going to pick a source that I actually have configured because I do not have credentials for CrowdStrike, but it'd look very similar. So this is what CrowdStrike looks like. I'm going to come over to my Splunk source here, and you can just come here and click live. Now, this isn't going to show anything, like I said, because data is not flowing. But what you're able to do is once you capture a sample, you're able to save it, store it in your leader in Cribble stream, and now you're able to play with that. So those samples you saw earlier in the pack, they don't have to be the ones from the pack. You're able to also use your own.
I think it's something critical for everyone to just, if you're doing this without some live capture, you have to get that data, find that data, get it from somewhere, and that can take a lot of time. We're here. It's a button click away.
And I think many of us have sat on the other side of that, is receiving a sample and saying, hey, this is what the data look like. You build all your configurations, you validate them, you deploy them, and the data looks nothing like that when it goes into production.
I see that too many times. It's like, yeah, getting the right data is such a problem. So this was the big deal. When I first saw this, I was like, oh my God, it's like you've invented fire.
I think it's all about just having a repeatable process that's accurate. I mean, outside of just, reduction, right? It's saving cycles, right? I don't think anybody wants to be rebuilding the same configurations over and over because they weren't accurate. I'm sure there's definitely more interesting things to be doing, or more emails to be checking.
There you go. And so we're going to wrap up a little bit. Do you have any final thoughts? Any closing wisdom you want to share with someone who might be interested in Cribble Stream?
Nothing specific. What I would say is, if you're facing a lot of these challenges with whether it be CrowdStrike or another data source, right, or another EDR platform, reach out to us. Even if it doesn't mean going through a demo, we have a lot of insight to share, a lot of value we can add. Or if you're just looking for advice, right, we have a great Cribble community. You're more than welcome to reach out to that. There's, I think, thousands of folks in the general channel, plenty of resources. Just know that you're not really alone out there, that this is really a partnership, and we're here to help you.
Yeah, completely agree. To join the Cribble community, just put the link at the bottom, cribble.io/community, and join our Slack community. We have about 5,600 users now. There's who are there ready to enthusiastically help you out. Also, don't forget about sandboxes. One thing I also went into something that Sid was mentioning: training is free. We have a user and an admin certification. It is ready and waiting for you. I spent so much money on getting trained. It blows me away that you can find help. It's ready, and so I think it's a great way to get started and get more value fast. Sid, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. If everyone has questions, we're all available in the Cribble community. We're here to help. We want your feedback. Feedback is really a gift. So we're here for you. So anything else, Sid?
Nope, that's all I have. And thank you for having me on. It's been great chatting.
Absolutely. We'll do it again soon. So everyone, thank you. Have a great day, and we'll be back on Friday.